Story 1.
It was supposed to be a fun weekend camping trip with my friends. We found the perfect spot deep in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and a glistening lake nearby. We set up our tents and gathered around the fire. Everything was perfect. Until all sorts of nonsense started happening. On the first night, as we sat around the crackling fire roasting marshmallows, we heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. At first, we brushed it off as just an animal passing through, but then we heard it again, closer this time. Sarah, always the brave one, got up to investigate with a flashlight in hand. She returned moments later, a puzzled look on her face. I swear I saw something moving out there, but now it's gone, she said, shaking her head. We all laughed it off, attributing it to our overactive imaginations playing tricks on us in the dark. The following day, while exploring the woods, we stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. Curiosity getting the best of us, we pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The interior was musty and filled with cobwebs, dust motes dancing in the beams of sunlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. As we poked around, we found old photographs scattered on the floor, depicting a family that once called this place home. It sent shivers down my spine, imagining the stories these forgotten relics held within their faded frames. That night, back at our campsite, the atmosphere had changed. A sense of anxious lingered in the air, casting a shadow over our once carefree group. We huddled closer together around the fire, seeking comfort in each other's presence. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the trees, sending us jumping to our feet in alarm. We turned towards the sound, our hearts pounding in our chests, only to see a deer darting away into the darkness. Relief was shed over us as we realized the source of the noise, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I could sense it in the way the leaves rustled when there was no breeze, in the stillness that settled over the forest like a heavy blanket. As the night wore on, we decided to turn in early, seeking solace in the safety of our tents. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest outside, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Just as I was starting to drift off, a soft whisper filled the air, so faint that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But then it came again, closer this time, almost like a gentle breeze carrying words on its breath. "Leave this place," the voice whispered, sending a chill down my spine. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what I had heard. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Or was there something truly otherworldly at play in these woods? I hesitantly unzipped my tent and peeked outside, but all I could see was the darkness of the night and the swaying trees, casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. Goosebumps prickled my skin as I crawled back into my tent, pulling the sleeping bag tight around me in a feeble attempt to ward off the unease creeping through my veins. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fitful sleep and strange dreams, the voice haunting my thoughts, even as dawn broke and the forest came alive with the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. As we packed up our campsite and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in those woods, that something ancient and powerful watched us from the shadows. And as we drove away, leaving behind the mysterious cabin and the whispering voice that still echoed in my mind, I knew that our weekend camping trip had turned into something far more mystical and unsettling than any of us had ever anticipated.
Story 2.
My friends and I had been planning this mountain camping trip for months. The weather was perfect and the air was filled with that crisp, early autumn chill that made you want to be outside. We were a group of 5. Me, Anna, Mike, Sarah, and Tom. We weren't experienced campers, but we were adventurous enough to want to try something new. We set up camp by a small clearing, surrounded by the towering pines and the occasional rustle of wildlife. The first night went by without a hitch. We enjoyed the fresh air, told stories, and laughed until our sides hurt. We had hiked further up the mountain that day, and by the time we got back, we were exhausted. We cooked dinner over the fire. And just as we were about to call it a night, we noticed something odd. Our tents, which we had secured firmly into the ground, were slightly askew. But we were too tired to give it much thought. That night, I woke up to the sound of what I thought was laughter. It was faint, but it was there. I nudged Anna, who was sharing the tent with me, and she heard it too. We stepped outside, expecting to find Mike playing a prank, but the sound stopped, and the camp was silent. We checked the other tents, and everyone was sound asleep. The next morning, we found our food supplies scattered around the campsite. It looked like an animal rummage, but the odd part was that some of the food was placed high up in the trees. How could an animal do that? We cleaned up, repacked our supplies, and tried to shake off the unease. On our last day, we decided to explore a cave we had seen on our map. It was a tight squeeze, but inside, we found what looked like paintings on the walls. They were modern materials, but the images were bizarre. Circles and lines in patterns that made no sense. We joked about aliens and secret societies, but none of us wanted to admit that it was genuinely unsettling. We left the cave feeling a bit spooked, and when we got back to our camp, we found a circle of stones we hadn't placed there. In the center, a pile of our own belongings that we had lost over the trip. Sunglasses, a water bottle, and a scarf. It was as if someone or something was watching us, playing with us. As we packed up our campsite, the unease lingered in the air. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was out there in the wilderness with us. But we tried to brush it off as just our overactive imaginations getting the best of us. As we hiked back down the mountain, the feeling of being followed persisted. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump. And then, just as we were about to reach the bottom, we heard it again, the faint sound of laughter echoing through the trees. Panic set in as we quickened our pace, desperate to get back to the safety of civilization. But just as we thought we were in the clear, we saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us with glowing eyes. Without a word, we all broke into a sprint, adrenaline pumping through our veins as we raced back to our cars. We didn't stop until we were miles away from that mountain, safe and sound in our homes. To this day, we still talk about that camping trip and the strange occurrences that haunted us. We may never know what or who was out there with us in the wilderness, but one thing is for sure. We won't be going back to that mountain anytime soon.
Story 3.
I never thought a simple camping trip would turn into the talk of the town. It was just me, my buddy Mike, and his dog Boomer. We set up camp on the seashore, a place we'd been 100 times before. The day was normal. We fished, laughed, and cooked up a decent catch. As night fell, we noticed the tide was unusually high, almost reaching our tents. We joked about waking up floating in the sea, but decided to move our gear further up the shore. That's when Boomer started acting up, barking at the waves like he saw something. Mike said he probably saw a fish or something, nothing to worry about. We settled in for the night, and I remember looking at the stars, thinking how clear they were out here. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Mike was shaking me awake. "The water's gone," he said. I didn't understand at first, but when I stepped out, the sea had retreated so far back it was barely visible in the moonlight. We found Boomer by the edge of the wet sand digging frantically. As we approached, we saw what he was after, an old rusted box. Inside, there were just some old coins and a water-damaged photo of the shore. We laughed it off, guessing someone's buried treasure joke from years ago. The next morning, the sea was back to normal, and we met a local on the beach. We told him about the box, and his face went pale. He said the last time the sea did that, a fisherman found a similar box. That fisherman's house burned down the next day. We chuckled, thinking it was just a spooky story. We packed up and headed home, leaving the box behind. A week later, Mike called me. "You won't believe this," he said, "and my garage caught fire last night. Everything was destroyed, including his fishing gear." We couldn't help but think about the local story. It was a strange trip, all right, but everything that happened has a logical explanation, right? High tides, a dog's keen sense, and an unfortunate coincidence with the fire. Still, we haven't been back to that shore since. just in case.
Story 4.
I've always been a fan of the great outdoors. So when my buddy suggested a winter camping trip up in the snowy mountains, I was all in. It was me, Jake, Mark, and Alex, 4 city guys looking to rough it for a weekend. We found a perfect spot near a frozen lake, surrounded by tall pines dusted with snow. The air was icy crisp, but the clear sky promised a beautiful starry night ahead. We set up our tents. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The crackling of the fire was the only sound breaking the silence of the snowy forest. Suddenly, we heard a strange noise coming from the woods. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on us, but as the noise grew louder, we couldn't ignore it any longer. We grabbed our flashlights and cautiously ventured into the darkness to investigate. What we found sent chills down our spines. A pack of wolves was circling our campsite, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Panic set in as we realized we were surrounded with no way to escape. Thinking quickly, we remembered the advice from our survival guide. Make yourself appear larger than you are to scare off predators. We stood together, raising our arms and shouting at the wolves. Surprisingly, they backed away, disappearing into the night. Relieved but still shaken, we returned to our campsite, deciding to stay awake for the rest of the night in case the wolves returned. As the hours passed, the temperature dropped and a thick fog rolled in, obscuring our surroundings. Our fire was now nothing but glowing coals, the warmth it provided long gone. We strained our ears for any sound that might signal the return of the wolves, but there was nothing. Only the oppressive, suffocating quiet. As the night deepened, so did the cold. We talked in hushed tones about what we should do come morning, but our plans were interrupted by a low, mournful howl that echoed through the trees. It was joined by another, and then another, until the night was filled with the haunting chorus of the pack. The wolves were not gone. They were calling to each other, communicating in ways we couldn't understand. The realization hit us hard. We were the prey here. In a panic, we scrambled to reignite the fire, hoping the light would keep the predators at bay. But as the flames flickered to life, Alex pointed to a faint glow in the distance. It was a light, moving slowly through the fog. Curiosity overcame our fear, and we decided to investigate. As we approached, the light grew brighter and we could make out a figure holding a lantern. It was an old man, his beard as white as the snow around us. He introduced himself as Elias, a hermit who lived in the mountains. Elias had seen the wolves and came to check on us. He offered us shelter in his cabin until morning. Grateful, we followed him through the fog. His cabin was small but warm, filled with the scent of pine and a crackling fireplace. We spent the rest of the night listening to Elias's tales of the mountains, of hidden valleys and secret streams teeming with fish. He spoke of the wolves with respect, not fear, and taught us that every creature has its place in the wild. As dawn broke, the fog lifted, revealing a breathtaking view of the mountains bathed in golden light. Elias showed us a safe path down the mountain, and we parted ways, promising to return. Our adventure had taken an unexpected turn, but it left us with a newfound respect for the wilderness and the mysterious hermit who became our savior.
Story 5.
I had been looking forward to our family camping trip for months. My wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids, Ben and Lily, were thrilled about spending a weekend in the great outdoors. We chose a picturesque spot near a serene lake surrounded by towering trees, a perfect setting for some quality time together. Setting up camp went smoothly, and soon we were enjoying the simplicity of nature, fishing, hiking, and roasting marshmallows over the crackling fire. The laughter of my children echoed through the woods, blending with the rustling leaves and chirping birds. It was idyllic, a scene straight out of a postcard. As evening approached, the sky turned a deep shade of orange, casting a warm glow over our campsite. We gathered around the fire, sharing stories and jokes while the flames danced in the fading light. Sarah handed out s'mores, and we savored the sweet treats as darkness descended upon the forest. That's when things took an unexpected turn. The familiar symphony of nature fell silent, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just an unsettling quiet that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Ben and Lily looked at me, their eyes wide with unease, and I did my best to reassure them that everything was fine. We decided to turn in early, hoping that the next day would bring back the usual sounds of the wilderness. But when morning broke, the world outside our tent was shrouded in a thick blanket of fog. The lake had disappeared from view, swallowed by the dense mist that enveloped our campsite. Ben and Lily thought it was a cool adventure, but Sarah and I exchanged concerned glances. Breakfast consisted of pancakes cooked on the camp stove, the fog swirling around us like tendrils of smoke. As we ate, the mist began to lift, revealing a strange sight. Our campsite was surrounded by a circle of mushrooms, large ones that definitely weren't there the day before. I knew mushrooms could grow quickly, but not that much. The kids were fascinated, making up stories about fairies and magic. Throughout the day, we stumbled upon more oddities in the woods. A tree that bore a striking resemblance to a human face, a rock that seemed to shift positions when we weren't looking. I chalked it up to our minds playing tricks on us, the product of an overactive imagination fueled by the eerie atmosphere of the fog-shrouded forest. By the time we returned to our campsite, the mushroom circle had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a faint impression in the soft earth. I couldn't explain it, but I brushed it off as a natural phenomenon and focused on preparing dinner over the fire. As night descended once again, a splash echoed from the direction of the lake, followed by a low melodic hum that sent shivers down my spine. The sound was haunting yet strangely beautiful. It left us mesmerized. We listened intently, captivated by the mysterious serenade that seemed to emanate from the heart of the fog-covered lake. The notes rose and fell like a lullaby, soothing yet tinged with an underlying sense of unease. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes reflecting the same mix of wonder and apprehension that I felt. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the haunting melody faded into the night, leaving us in silence once more. We exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what to make of the inexplicable occurrence. Ben and Lily huddled closer to us, seeking comfort in the safety of our embrace. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the fog dissipating to reveal the sun-dappled landscape in all its natural beauty. We packed up our gear, ready to return home with memories of a camping trip. As we drove away from the tranquil woods, I glanced back at the lake one last time, a sense of peace settling over me. Though the strange occurrences of our camping adventure remained unexplained, they served as a reminder of the enigmatic wonders that lay hidden within the depths of the wilderness, waiting to be discovered by those willing to embrace the mysteries of nature.